Today, I am reviewing the first book to be reviewed on this channel. It is called The Man with the Candy, and it was published in 1974, and it's by Jack Olsen. And it details the murders of at least 29 children who were targeted and abused by a guy named Dean Corll and his two teenage accomplices, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. So when I was listening to this book, I didn't realize that it was written so close in time to the murders. I think that there's a lot of details that became known after the book was written connected to the number of victims and the link between Dean Corll and those murders. And it's kind of really funny how people have perceptions of other people. So the last part of the book really focuses heavily on Dean Corll's relationship with his mother and the mother's kind of biography. And there actually isn't any point to that because the mother seemed to be completely oblivious to the depravity that her son was capable of. And it's so bad that I finished the book and I was like, well, maybe Dean didn't actually do anything, you know. Uh, but reading the Wikipedia article later, there's a lot more information about some of the murders in the Wikipedia article than there is in the original book, and I think that's just because, we've had about 50 years since those murders to have more evidence and find more victims and things like that. The thing that was quite surprising is a couple of things. One is probably much more serious than the others. So maybe I'll talk about that first. The book does a really good job of showing how the police didn't care at all about the first victims of this serial killer because they were boys who went missing from this lower income area of Houston called the Heights. And it describes that basically like there were two types of murders in Houston, like murders of important people and murders of poor people. And murders of important people, meaning rich people, white people, were, you know, given more priority over murders of people who were considered lesser than. And even when some of the victims were discovered, the police were saying things like, oh yeah, he was a juvenile delinquent, nobody misses this guy, nobody misses that guy. So if the police had just done their job, and there's like a heartbreaking thing in the beginning of the book where two boys go missing in different chapters, and the first parents search all night for their kid. They hire a PI. They like contact the police all the time, and the police don't do very much. And the same thing happens with the second boy. So as I said, there's about 29 victims in this case, and those two victims happened in the beginning. So you can really say that, of course, the main responsibility for the crimes is Dean Corll, right? But obviously, if there is like a repeated pattern of kids going missing and the police don't take it seriously, they also have, they bear a bit of responsibility that they didn't stop him in time. And I know, as I said, this was 50 years ago, this case, but do we really think that anything would change now? I don't think so, unfortunately. The other, so that's the more important takeaway from that book is the the true crime genre. Like, you can ask, like, why is it popular? Why is it like continually people like read this stuff or watch this stuff? But one thing that I have gathered from it is that if police were trained better how to investigate murders and crimes, and they really did treat everybody equally, and every missing person case was given the attention it deserved, then a lot of serial killers and murderers would be caught and convicted than they have been in the past. So the other thing that is a little bit less important than that first issue, but is still quite interesting, is when it happened, there was all of this stuff like Dean Corll was homosexual, so these are like homosexual crimes, right? I wouldn't even define Dean Corll as a homosexual. I'd say that he's a pedophile and a monster and somebody who was exploiting children for his own nefarious purposes. And I am really quite surprised that his accomplices were this David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. So Dean Corll eventually was killed by one second. He was killed by one of them. He was killed by Henley. He was killed by Elmer Wayne Henley. So each of those boys, Williams, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, they were teenagers when they met Corll. They were like 12. So he basically groomed them that they would like support him, and eventually it became sort of an abusive relationship where Dean was asking for sexual favors, and they got dragged into this man's perversion more and more. So it's really, so they were they were blamed in an equal, because they were alive, because as the main perpetrator was dead because one of them shot him in self-defense. Because that's another part that's interesting about this case is that I don't know who says this, but maybe it was like one of the investigators said something like, yeah, these are the two accomplices who are alive now. We don't know if Dean had any more earlier and he murdered them and he replaced them with these boys. So it could have been like these killings could have been going on for a much longer period of time. So yeah, a really quite shocking case for me. Because it's not shocking in the sense that, I mean, the murders are shocking, and the book actually doesn't go into great detail about how the murders were committed. It was basically like the most basic version of what happened to these boys. What really happened was much worse, and I'm not going to go into details. You can look it up for yourself. So that's shocking, but also the fact that that could happen to these kids in one of the richest countries in the world, and nobody did anything until the actual murderer was shot by one of his victims. It doesn't, it doesn't make any sense. So if you like true crime, I would recommend picking up that book. It's a little bit old-fashioned with some of the language, and the fact that it was old-fashioned kind of made sense after I discovered it was written in 1974. So, yeah, check out that book. I'd give it maybe like 7 out of 10, just because when you finish the book, you're kind of like, well, did Dean really do it? And of course he did it. That's because there's so much focus on his mother, and maybe that's also because the the author was trying to say that it's the mother's fault that he became that way. And we don't know anything about the relationship that Dean had with his father or his multiple stepfathers. Maybe that's it, you know, because it's so crazy. But the most I maybe I'm getting it wrong, but I read some horrifying statistic like the chances of a child being abused both physically and sexually increase if the mother has rewed someone and there's a stepfather situation and he's not the biological parent of the children. I mean, that doesn't mean that every stepfather is a jackass. It just means statistically the possibility increases with that. So, you know, we don't know. You don't know in that kind of book. So, like, all of the blame is put on the mom. And maybe not all of the blame, it's just there's a lot of focus on what the mom says. And the mom clearly didn't know her son very well because she defended him probably until she died. Yeah, so check that out. Yeah, so an adult topic on this one. Maybe my next book review will be a bit a happier topic. Yes, it will be because I don't want to. I don't want to listen or read that depressing. Oh, I'm reading a Superman book, so maybe I'll review that if I get done in time. All right, talk to you later. Bye bye.